to alcohol. Is this man alone? Absolutely not. Our fellowship is loaded with that individual. You know how many people have come in here and heard this statement? You can't stay sober for job, wife, and family? Have you ever heard that? What do they mean? You can't have a long period of sobriety? Staying dry? They mean when you achieve your goal, then what's going to happen to you? This man had a goal to become successful in business. So he did not drink until he became successful in business. What happened when he achieved his goal? He got drunk. A friend of mine who worked with me when I came into the program was sober 26 years. When I ran a rehab unit in Cleveland, he got drunk 26 years later. 26 years previous, he came into AA and he said he was going to lose his job. He didn't want to lose his job. He quit drinking. For 26 years I heard from that man or anyone that I worked with. I never read the big book. I never did them steps. I don't do that God business. I just go to meetings and help other people. What happened to him when he retired? He got drunk. He's back in the program about 8 years now. And you know what he tells everybody? Your recovery is in a big book in those steps. He's fortunate. He survived. My other friend from Amherst retired from Ford Motor Company after 17 years. 17 years when he retired, he went out drinking. He's not been back, in and out since. All right? And when I first came into AA, I went out. And when I came back, I said, "Where's Eddie?" Well, he wanted to get his girls through college. It took him 8 years to get his girls through college. The last one graduated college. He went out drinking. People can stop drinking for ulterior motives in here, and they can use the fellowship to assist them. But you must be careful when you're dealing with those individuals that they don't lead you to believe that you, if you're a real alcoholic, don't need this program. See? You have to be careful what you're listening to in here. And these are some examples for you. Young people may be encouraged by this man's experience to think they can stop as he did on their own willpower. We doubt if many of them can do it because none will really want to stop, and hardly one of them, because of the peculiar mental twist already acquired, will find he can win out. Several of our crowd, men of 30 or less, had been drinking only a few years, but they found themselves as helpless as those who had been drinking 20 years. It can happen sooner to some. I've heard some people say, and I believe them, that they were alcoholic from their very first drink. They said from the very first drink, once they started drinking, they lost control. I don't care. I don't care if you're an alcoholic from the very beginning or it took you 25 or 50 years. What's important that you recognize there is a problem. Let's get into the solution. Who cares why you became an alcoholic? Who cares what your mother and father did? Psychiatrist asked me one time, did your mother and father have a normal sex life? I said, they must have. They had me. I don't know what their sex life was. To be gravely affected, one does not necessarily have to drink a long time nor take the quantities some of us have. This is particularly true of women. Potential female alcoholics often turn into the real thing and are gone beyond recall in a few years. Certain drinkers would be greatly insulted if called alcoholics are astonished at their inability to stop. We are familiar with the symptoms, see large numbers of potential alcoholics among young people everywhere, but try and get them to see it. Try and get them to see it. As we look back, we feel we had gone on drinking many years beyond the point where we could quit on our own willpower. If anyone questions whether he has entered this dangerous area, let him try leaving alcohol alone for 1 year. If he is real alcoholic and very far advanced, there is scant chance of success. In the early days of our drinking, we occasionally remain sober for a year or more, becoming serious drinkers again later. But what does that tell me if I have to leave it alone? It tells me I have a problem with it. If I have to leave it alone to control it, that's telling me there's a problem. Though you may be able to stop for a considerable period, you may yet be a potential alcoholic. Underline this. We think few to whom this book will appeal can stay dry anything like a year. Some will be drunk the day after making their resolutions, most of them within a few weeks. For those who are unable to drink moderately, the question is how to stop altogether. Here's the assumption. We are assuming, of course, that the reader desires to stop. We assume everybody in this room today has a desire to quit using and drinking. Whether such a person can quit upon a non-spiritual basis depends upon the extent to which he has already lost the power to choose whether he will drink or not. In other words, if some people come in here at an earlier stage of their alcoholism, it tells us that maybe the fellowship may be enough. It's telling us that in black and white. Whether a person can quit upon a non-spiritual basis or not is dependent upon how far his alcoholism has gripped him. The farther along the road you go in alcoholism, the more convinced you should be that you need a spiritual way of life. Many of us felt we had plenty of character. There was a tremendous urge to cease forever, yet we found it impossible. This is the baffling feature of alcoholism as we know it, this utter inability to leave it alone no matter how great the necessity or the wish. How then shall we help our readers determine to their own satisfaction whether they are one of us? That's a question. How are we going to help you decide whether you're one of us? Here's the question, here's the answer. The experiment of quitting for a period of time will be helpful, but we think we can render an even greater service to alcoholic sufferers and perhaps the medical fraternity. So we shall describe some of the mental states that precede a relapse into drinking, for obviously this is the crux of the matter. What's the crux of the matter? The mental states that precede a relapse into drinking is the crux of the matter. What sort of thinking dominates an alcoholic who repeats time after time the desperate experiment of the first drink? That's a question. Friends who have reasoned with him after a spree which has brought him to the point of divorce or bankruptcy are mystified when he walks directly into a saloon. Why does he? That's a question. Of what is he thinking? That's a question. Now we're going to answer these questions that he asked. All your questions are answered in the big book. They mean every question they ask, they answer. Now let's get the answer to those questions. They're going to answer it by a case history of another alcoholic. They're going to tell you the thinking that dominates or precedes the relapse into his drinking again after he has quit. Our first example is a friend we shall call Jim, not John, because John is not a friend. This man has a charming wife and family. He inherited a lucrative automobile agency. That means it makes a lot of money. That's not a type of car. He had a commendable World War record. He was a good salesman. Everybody likes him. He's an intelligent man so far, normal so far as we can see, except for a nervous disposition. He did no drinking until he was 35. In a few years he became so violent when intoxicated he had to be committed. On leaving the asylum, that's treatment center, he came into contact with us. We told him what we knew of alcoholism and the answer we had found. They're telling him, spiritual recovery. He made a beginning. Underline that. He made a beginning. Here was his beginning. His family was reassembled, and he began to work as a salesman for the business he had lost through drinking. All went well for a time, but he failed to enlarge his spiritual life. He put the necessary ingredients to get his family back together in a job, and he got a few bucks. He stopped. He didn't grow spiritually. To his consternation, he found himself drunk a half dozen times in rapid succession. Now this guy had to be well liked, because if they're coming back in the old days for the guy 6 times, he had to be a lot like me. He was well liked. On each of these occasions, we worked with him, reviewing carefully what had happened. He agreed he was a real alcoholic and in a serious condition. He knew he faced another trip to the asylum if he kept on. Moreover, he would lose his family for whom he had a deep affection. You see, this guy knows everything. He knows what's going to happen to him if he drinks. I knew what was going to happen to me if I drank again. Did that deter me? Self-knowledge is to no avail. Yet he got drunk again. We asked him to tell us exactly what happened. This is his story. I came to work on Tuesday morning. I remembered I felt irritated. I had to be a salesman for a concern I once owned. I had a few words with the boss, but nothing serious. Then I decided to drive into the country and see one of my prospects for a car. What's wrong with the statements as far as we've gone so far?
Went to work on Tuesday.
Right. What happened on Monday, right? Hey?
Yeah, resentment too. He used to own the auto.
Exactly. He missed a day on a job and the boss probably said something like this. Hey, we work 5 days a week here. We don't start on Tuesday, we start on Monday. That's just something that might have happened. But what does the guy not deal with? In his spiritual program, he doesn't like the fact that he lost the agency. He's working for a company he used to own. Resentments is the number one offender. He gets more alcoholics drunk than anything else. All right? He decided to drive into the country and see one of his prospects for a car. That was normal at the time. I don't know, Father Joe knows it and a couple other guys in here, but at one time car salesmen used to come door to door. You didn't go to the lots to buy a car. They'd come to your house. They'd bring the car, let you drive it 2 or 3 days, you checked it out. It's the way it used to be. So there was nothing wrong with this. He went where he figured he'd sell a car. On the way, I felt hungry, so I stopped at a roadside place where they have a bar. I had no intention of drinking. I just thought I would get a sandwich. I also had the notion I might find a customer for a car at this place, which was familiar, for I'd been going to it for years. I had eaten there many times during the months I was sober. I sat down at a table and ordered a sandwich and a glass of milk. Still no thought of drinking. I ordered another sandwich and decided to have another glass of milk. Suddenly, not planned, suddenly, the thought crossed my mind, if I were to put an ounce of whiskey in my milk, it couldn't hurt me on a full stomach. I ordered a whiskey and poured it into the milk. I vaguely sensed I was not being any too smart, but felt reassured as I was taking a whiskey on a full stomach. The experiment went so well that I ordered another whiskey and poured it into more milk. That didn't seem to bother me, so I tried another. Thus started one more journey to the asylum for Jim. That's treatment center. He went back. He relapsed. Here was the threat of commitment, the loss of family, position, to say nothing of that intense mental and physical suffering which drinking always caused him. He had much knowledge about himself as an alcoholic, yet reasons for drinking were easily pushed aside in favor of the foolish idea that he could take whiskey if he only mixed it with milk. Sound incredible? That's why alcoholics are hard to understand. That's why we're hard to understand. Look what they say. Here's our insanity. Whatever the precise definition of the word may be, we call this plain insanity. Why? Once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic. It doesn't matter if you drink anything along with your alcohol. Once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic. How can such a lack of proportion of the ability to think straight be called anything else? You may think this an extreme case. To us it is not far-fetched, for this kind of thinking has been characteristic of every single one of us. We have sometimes reflected more than Jim did upon the consequences, but there was always a curious mental phenomenon that parallel with our sound reasoning. There inevitably ran some insanely trivial excuse for taking the first drink. Our sound reasoning failed to hold us in check. The insane idea won out. What's the insane idea? We can drink. When we say the second step came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity, means to accept the fact that we're alcoholic. It has nothing to do with mental health issues. Once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic. if we think we can drink it again, that's insanity for an alcoholic. Next day, we would ask ourselves in all earnestness and sincerity how it could have happened. In some circumstances, we've gone out deliberately to get drunk, feeling ourselves justified by what? Nervousness, anger, worry, depression, jealousy, or the like. But even in this type of beginning, we are obliged to admit that our justification for a spree was insanely insufficient in the light of what has always happened. We now see that when we began to drink deliberately instead of casually, there was little serious or effective thought during the period of premeditation of what the terrific consequences might be. In other words, when we start thinking about drinking again, we're coming right back here to this chart, and we're starting to believe on this chart here that we're back over here. We're back with the 9. Anytime a thought of alcohol comes back into your mind again, pull your chart out and look at it, and you will see you fit this category. You don't have the enzymes necessary to metabolize alcohol. Once you take a drink physically, you're going to set off the craving for more. You're going to come through, you're going to be filled with guilt, remorse, resentment, self-pity, and fear, and you're going to have to stop again and understand that you're going to have that can't quit obsession with you again. We need a power greater than ourselves. That's what the second step is saying to overcome this problem. Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves was necessary for us to recover. What are the conditions that can take us back to alcohol justified? We mentioned some of them. Nervousness, anger, worry, depression, jealousy, resentment. If these things will take us back to drink, we have to find something that will relieve that condition, right? If you hold on to your mark here, we're on page 37, turn to page 87 in your book. And you're going to see how working this program can relieve a lot of conditions. The bottom of page 87. As we go through the day, we pause when agitated or doubtful and ask for the right thought or action. We constantly remind ourselves we are no longer running the show, humbly saying to ourselves many times each day, "Thy will be done." If you say to yourself many times each day, "Thy will be done," look at the results of that. We are then in much less danger of excitement, fear, anger, worry, self-pity, or foolish decisions. We become much more efficient. We do not tire so easily, for we are not burning up energy foolishly as we did when we were trying to arrange life to suit ourselves. How does we get rid of those conditions? The simplicity of the program, a conscious contact with God simply by saying many times each day, "Thy will be done." Is that difficult? Don't complicate the simplicity of this program. Our behavior is as absurd and incomprehensible with respect to the first drink as that of an individual with a passion, say, for jaywalking. He gets a thrill out of skipping in front of fast-moving vehicles. He enjoys himself for a few years in spite of friendly warnings. In other words, in the beginning, guys are saying, "Hey, buddy, you better slow down in that traffic. What the heck's wrong with you? You better lay low on your drinking. Don't drink so much." Up to this point, you would label him as a foolish chap having queer ideas of fun. Luck then deserts him, and he is slightly injured several times in succession. You would expect him, if he were normal, to cut it out. I would. If that was my son, I'd probably beat him. Presently, he is hit again, and this time has a fractured skull. Within a week after leaving the hospital, a fast-moving trolley car breaks his arm. He tells you he has decided to stop jaywalking for good, but in a few weeks he breaks both legs. On through the years, his conduct continues, accompanied by his continual promises to be careful or to keep off the streets altogether. Finally, he can no longer work. His wife gets a divorce, and he's held up to ridicule. He tries every known means to get the jaywalking idea out of his head. He shuts himself up in an asylum, hoping to mend his ways. But the day he comes out, he races in front of a fire engine, which breaks his back. Such a man would be crazy, wouldn't he? You may think our illustration is too ridiculous, but is it? We have been through the ringer, have to admit if we substituted alcoholism for jaywalking, the illustration would fit perfectly, or would fit exactly. However intelligent we have been in other respects where alcohol has been involved, we have been strangely insane. Strong language, but isn't it true? Yes. The jaywalker, mine was fighting. My mother said, son, when you were a little boy and you were learning to walk, we ran through the house putting cushions on the corners of the woodwork and everything else. So when you fall down, you wouldn't hurt yourself. And that protected you, and we protected you all through your life. Now when you grow up and you're a man and you're supposed to be able to think, look how you come home every Friday. You're banged up. She couldn't understand it. Some of you are thinking, yes, what you tell us is true, but it doesn't fully apply. We admit we have some of these symptoms, but we have not gone to the extremes you fellows did, nor are we likely to, for we understand ourselves so well after what you have told us that such things cannot happen again. Here comes self-knowledge again, right? We have not lost everything in life through drinking, and we certainly do not intend to. Thanks for the information. That may be true of certain non-alcoholic people who, though drinking foolishly and heavenly at the present time, are able to stop or moderate because their brains and bodies have not been damaged as ours were. Underline this. But the actual or potential alcoholic, with hardly an exception, will be absolutely unable to stop drinking on the basis of self-knowledge. This is a point we wish to emphasize and re-emphasize, to smash home upon our alcoholic readers that it has been revealed to us out of bitter experience. Let us take another illustration. We're going again to the psychic change that's necessary. Information and education does not seem to do it. What did Carl Jung, the world's most renowned psychiatrist, say to Roland Hazard? Yes, there is hope for you. You can recover through a what? Vital spiritual experience. Why do we go through the first 11 steps of AA? So we can get to the experience which relieves us of our condition. We don't go through the first 11 steps to eliminate alcohol or drugs. We go through the first 11 to bring a power greater than ourselves into our lives. Fred is the partner in a well-known accounting firm. His income is good. He has a fine home, is happily married and a father of promising children of college age. He has so attractive a personality he makes friends with everyone. There I am again. It's getting late in the afternoon, right? If ever there was a successful businessman, it is Fred. To all appearances, he is a stable, well-balanced individual, yet he is alcoholic. We first saw Fred about a year ago in a hospital where he had gone to recover from a bad case of jitters. It was his first experience of this kind, and he was much ashamed of it. You hear what we just read? He was much ashamed of it. He's in a hospital for it. Alcoholism is still shame-based. And that's why most people get it through courts or employers. Alcoholics who have the disease and are not ordered into this treatment is still considered a shame-based disease. I can tell you story after story when I work with the court system of how many influential citizens in our community were planted for no other reason than they had alcoholism and the family was too ashamed for them to admit it. They made all kinds of, oh, he had this problem in his life, or she had this, or this happened in her life. I said, no, he's alcoholic, he can't drink. I made arrangements to put people in the hospital, one particular, very influential family. The son called me back and said, we're not ready to take such drastic measures yet. You know what the drastic measures were? Put him in a detox unit. 10 days later, they buried him. He drank himself to death. They would rather have him dead than in an alcoholism ward. Don't believe we're making progress. How did most of you get here? Probably through the courts or an employer. Most of us. Far from admitting he was an alcoholic, he told himself he came to the hospital to rest his nerves. He's lying about it. He's not honest about his alcoholism. The doctor intimated strongly he might be worse than he realized. For a few days he was depressed about his condition. He made up his mind to quit drinking altogether. It never occurred to him that perhaps he could not do so in spite of his character and standing. Fred would not believe himself an alcoholic, much less accept a spiritual remedy for his problem. We told him what we knew about alcoholism. He was interested and conceded that he had some of the symptoms, but he was a long way from admitting he could do nothing about it himself. He was positive that this humiliating experience plus the knowledge he had acquired would keep him sober the rest of his life. Again, self-knowledge would fix it. Knowing is not enough. We heard no more of Fred for a while. One day we were told he was back in the hospital. This time he was quite shaky. He soon indicated he was anxious to see us. The story he told is most instructive, for here was a chap absolutely convinced he had to stop drinking, who had no excuse for drinking, who exhibited splendid judgment and determination in all his other concerns, yet was flat back on his back nevertheless. Let him tell you about it. And here's what Fred says. I was much impressed with what you fellows said about alcoholism, and I frankly did not believe it would be possible for me to drink again. I rather appreciated your ideas about the subtle insanity which precedes the first drink, but I was confident it could not happen to me after what I had learned. I reasoned I was not so far advanced as most of you fellas, that I had been usually successful in licking my other personal problems, and that I would therefore be successful where you men failed. I felt I had every right to be self-confident. That would be only a matter of exercising my willpower and keeping on guard. In this frame of mind, I went about my business, and for a time all was well. You know why? He wasn't drinking. He could function. I had no trouble refusing drinks and began to wonder if I had not been making too hard work out of a simple matter. One day I went to Washington to present some accounting evidence to a government bureau. I had been out of town before during this particular dry spell, so there was nothing new about that. Physically, I felt fine. Neither did I have any pressing problems or worries. My business came off well. I was pleased and knew my partners would be too. It was the end of a perfect day, not a cloud on the horizon. This guy has got no pressures on him. Everything's fallen in place for him. Why? He's not drinking alcohol. And we have found this is what they're saying in a book previously. We build up the confidence of those people around us. We quit drinking for a period of time. They all put their hope back into us again. And what happens? A senseless series of sprees, and we're off again. Look what happens to this guy. I went to my hotel and leisurely dressed for dinner. Leisurely means like my wife does. You know how long it takes her when you're sitting going someplace? That's leisurely getting dressed. You know, when you're sitting there, I told her one day, I said, Carol, you have to throw your clock away and put a calendar on a wall. As I crossed the threshold of the dining room, the thought came to mind it would be nice to have a couple of cocktails with dinner. That was all, nothing more. The man did not plan his drunk. That's spontaneous. That's why he's writing it again in that nervous handwriting of his. The man walked across the threshold and an idea came to his mind. And when that idea turns into obsession, what happens? Goodbye. I ordered a cocktail in my meal. Then I ordered another cocktail. After dinner, I decided to take a walk. And when he's taking that walk, he's probably thinking to himself, I had 2 drinks, no more. I got this thing licked. When I returned to the hotel, it struck me a highball would be fine before going to bed. So I stepped into the bar and had 1. I remembered having several more that night and plenty next morning. I have a shadowy recollection of being in an airplane bound for New York and of finding a friendly taxi cab driver at the landing field instead of my wife. The driver escorted me about for several days. I know little of where I went or what I said and did, then came to hospital with unbearable mental and physical suffering. What happened to that man again? What happened to him after he took a drink? The same thing we saw on the chart so many times. When a man physically cannot metabolize alcohol and is left with the mental obsession, then he's powerless. This guy took a drink of alcohol, he went right back through the process again. All right? Once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic. We have to understand that abstinence takes care of this. But the program gets rid of these can't quit obsession ideas. Those ideas don't come into your mind when you have a spiritual experience or awakening. If they do, you're able to slough them off. But if you don't treat your alcoholism, ideas like this are going to become sensible to you because you'll have no higher power in your life. As soon as I regained my ability to think, I went carefully over that evening in Washington. Not only had I been off guard, I had made no fight whatever against the first drink. This time I had not thought of the consequences at all. The mental obsession. I had commenced to drink as carelessly as though the cocktails were ginger ale. I now remembered what my alcoholic friends had told me, how they prophesied that if I had an alcoholic mind, the time and place would come I would drink again. They had said that though I did raise a defense, it would one day give way before some trivial reason for having a drink. Well, just that did happen and more. For what I had learned of alcoholism did not occur to me at all. I knew from that moment I had an alcoholic mind. I saw that willpower and self-knowledge would not help in those strange mental blank spots. I had never been able to understand people who said a problem had them hopelessly defeated. I knew then it was a crushing blow. All right? Some people say, well, you know, I quit smoking cigarettes on my own. I didn't have any help. I can do the same thing with alcohol. Well, go ahead and try. I don't argue with anybody. If you try and it works, glad. I'll never see you again. I'm happy for you. But if you try and it doesn't work, come back and see us. If you have tried your own programs for whatever addiction you're here for, and you find you're using again, don't consider yourself a loser. Just say, I have proven to myself, just like these guys, that maybe AA makes sense after all. It's your life. It's your gift, if you want it. Two of the members of Alcoholics Anonymous came to see me. They grinned, which I didn't like so much, and then asked me if I thought myself alcoholic and if I were really licked this time. I had to concede both propositions. They piled on me heaps of evidence to the effect that an alcoholic mentality such as I had exhibited in Washington was a hopeless condition. They cited cases out of their own experience by the dozen. This process snuffed out the last flicker of conviction I could do the job myself. Then they outlined the spiritual answer and program of action which 100 of them had followed successfully. Though I had been only a nominal churchman, their proposals were not intellectually hard to swallow. But the program of action, though entirely sensible, was pretty drastic. It meant I would have to throw several lifelong conceptions out the window. That was not easy. But the moment I made up my mind to go through with the process, I had the curious feeling that my alcoholic condition was relieved, as in fact it proved to be. And what this man did is he made a decision to turn his will and life over to the care of God as we understood them. You're going to find out that tomorrow when we get into the book and into the steps, when we do this step together, and you know you don't have to do it if you don't want to, but we find out going through the process, some of us have already done that, some of us haven't. Nobody knows who did and who didn't. But you will find out after we go through this third step that feeling's going to start vibrating in this room. And you will also see the directions tell you you go on with the program. It doesn't say a year later. It says immediately. And when you start getting into these steps and see the directions that are laid out for you, you're going to find out how much you've been missing if you haven't gotten this into your life yet. And that's what this man found out. Quite as important was the discovery that spiritual principles would solve all my problems. I have since been brought into a way of living infinitely more satisfying and I hope more useful than the life I lived before. My old manner of life was by no means a bad one, but I would not exchange its best moments for the worst I have now. I would not go back to it even if I could. What statement did we just make? When a man stands up and he leads and he says, I wouldn't give my best day, my worst day sober for my best day drinking. Got that right out of the big book. That's just what we covered there. Fred's story speaks for itself. We hope it strikes home to thousands like him. He had only felt the first nip of the ringer. Most alcoholics have to be pretty badly mangled before they really commence to solve their problems. Many doctors and psychiatrists agree with our conclusions. One of these men, staff member of a world-renowned hospital, recently made this statement to some of us. What you say about the general hopelessness of the average alcoholic's plight is, in my opinion, correct. As to two of you men whose stories I have heard, there is no doubt in my mind that you were 100% hopeless apart from divine help. Had you offered yourself as patients to this hospital, I would not have taken you if I had been able to avoid it. People like you are too heartbreaking. Though not a religious person, I have profound respect for the spiritual approach in such cases as yours. For most cases, there is virtually no other solution. Once more, the alcoholic at certain times has no effective mental defense against the first drink. Except in a few rare cases, neither he nor any other human being can provide such a defense. His defense must come from a higher power. Now, that's strong language. But when people were accepting the fact that what they were presenting in this program was of essential necessity for us to recover, they were showing about a 75% recovery rate. It's when we have gotten away from the spiritual message and we have sold people the idea that all you have to do is come and sit down in a chair and keep it warm 7 nights a week, 365 days a year, and some kind of magic is going to occur, is where we have come into the confusion. We have so insisted that meetings are the answer to our problems that nobody gets into the program of action. Alcoholics Anonymous and its 12 steps are a treatment for alcoholism. The fellowship is a support group. The steps treat my alcoholism. Why do we consider this a spiritual program? Because from the very beginning, the idea came from a psychiatrist who said a spiritual experience is necessary. Therefore, we designed a process that is spiritual in nature for us to have a spiritual occurrence in our life, a spiritual experience or awakening. That's what the whole program is all about. That relieves us of this mental condition to go back. It's not difficult. Don't make it that way. But don't ever leave any of these sessions and say, Finley said all I got to do is read the big book. Some people have done that. He says, I don't have to go to meetings. I go to as many meetings as anybody in this room, but I also work the steps every day of my life. Because you see, another piece of misinformation is you do the first 9 one time. You're going to find that's misinformation. You work the 12 steps every day of your life. There's no such thing as 3 maintenance steps. I don't know where that baloney got started. Let's stay with the black print, all right?